Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories. Powerful Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine could be on the agenda as Trump meets Zelenskyy this week. Meanwhile, talks between communist Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Trump look to be back on.
President Trump signs the Gaza peace deal in Egypt along with Middle East leaders. Trump heralds what he calls the historic dawn of a new Middle East.
Will the first round of missed paychecks pressure lawmakers to reopen the government? Senators return to Washington as the shutdown enters its 14th day.
With weather, the East Coast reeling from a powerful nor'easter, parts of Alaska devastated by the remnants of a typhoon, and in Arizona hit by heavy storms, the latest as rescues are still underway.
He would have been 32 today. President Trump awards Charlie Kirk with the Presidential Medal of Freedom at the White House.
And a California man takes home the prize during an annual pumpkin weigh-off championship with a monster pumpkin weighing more than 2,300 pounds.
This is NTD Good Morning, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
Good morning. Great to have you with us.
Today's Tuesday, October 14th. You're watching NTD Good Morning. Today's top news, a high-stakes summit this week. President Trump will meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Washington this Friday.
That's right. NTD's Daniel Monahan reports on that, and he also has an update on U.S.-China relations.
Я говорив з президентом Трампом.
Ukrainian President Zelenskyy is scheduled to meet with U.S. officials, defense contractors, and members of Congress ahead of a meeting with President Trump. Zelenskyy says the focus of the visit is air defense and Ukraine's long-range strike capabilities, part of efforts to increase pressure on Russia. He thanked President Trump for what he called their ongoing dialogue and support. The visit follows 2 phone calls between the leaders over the weekend. Zelenskyy said some issues were too sensitive to discuss by phone, making an in-person meeting essential.
NATO pays us 100% for the weapons, and then they send them into Ukraine. And we talked about the weapons they need.
Kyiv has stepped up lobbying for Tomahawk cruise missiles, capable of hitting targets up to 1,000 miles away, as Russia intensifies strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure and makes incremental gains along the front. Trump has signaled increasing frustration with Russia's conduct in recent weeks and confirmed that the missiles are under consideration. He said Monday the Tomahawks could be sold to NATO allies, who could then transfer them to Ukraine.
They'd like to have Tomahawks. That's a step up. They'd like to have Tomahawks. We talked about that. And so we'll see. Well, I don't know. I might have to speak to Russia, to be honest with you, about Tomahawks. Do they want to have Tomahawks going in their direction? I don't think so.
Trump says he may speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin before finalizing a decision.
I might say, look, if this war's not going to get settled, I'm going to send them Tomahawks. I may say that. The Tomahawk is an incredible weapon, very offensive weapon.
Putin has warned that supplying Tomahawks would mark a new stage of escalation. Meanwhile, President Trump said Monday he believes Turkish President Erdogan could play a key role in ending the conflict.
Erdogan can. He's respected by Russia. Ukraine I can't tell you about, but he is respected by Putin. And he's a friend of mine, you can see. Why? I get along with the tough ones. I don't get along with the weak ones. I get along with the tough ones.
Over to China, President Trump signaled he will meet with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping at the upcoming APEC summit in South Korea. The news comes after Chinese authorities seem to walk back an earlier announcement that China would tighten critical minerals export controls. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent reacted on Fox News.
I believe that the president thinks that this may have been, from a lower level official. The Chinese system is quite brittle, so this may not have come from Xi Jinping himself. This may have come, from a Chinese hardliner.
The APEC summit is scheduled to run from October 31st to November 1st in South Korea. And President Trump is set to visit Malaysia on October 26th for ASEAN talks in Kuala Lumpur, according to the Malaysian foreign minister. Leaders there hope to finalize a lasting ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia after deadly border clashes. Malaysia and the U.S. helped broker the initial truce, and both will oversee efforts to remove mines and heavy weapons from the area. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Great report there from Daniel. Next, we're looking at China and the U.S. and Beijing having opened a new front in their trade war, this time at sea.
Both countries began imposing export fees on each other's shipping firms today. The move affects everything from crude oil to holiday goods. China says its fees target U.S.-linked vessels but exempt Chinese-built ships.
Meanwhile, Beijing also sanctioned 5 U.S.-affiliated units of South Korean shipbuilder Hanwha Ocean, which it said aided a U.S. probe into Chinese trade practices. This sent Hanwha shares tumbling nearly 6%. And President Donald Trump will host Argentine President Javier Milei at the White House today, which is their second meeting in a month. The meeting comes as Milei faces market turmoil and prepares for midterm elections in Argentina.
Last week, the U.S. Treasury confirmed a $20 billion currency swap to stabilize Argentina's peso. Some economists say the deal could boost reserves without adding debt, but they warn there could be political implications for Argentina. And President Trump at the Gaza Peace Summit in Egypt signed the ceasefire agreement yesterday and says phase 2 of the deal had already begun. The president also said the U.S. is ready for a peace deal with Iran. NTD's Washington correspondent Mario Otsu has more from the White House.
This is not only the end of a war. This is the historic dawn of a new Middle East.
President Trump at the Gaza Peace Summit in Egypt, signing the historic ceasefire agreement alongside other Middle East leaders, while also saying that his peacemaking aspirations go beyond ending this war. This is coming on a day of joy and reunion as all 20 living Israeli hostages and nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners are released.
The hostages are back. The hostages are back.
And President Trump is saying that phase 2 of the 20-point ceasefire plan has already started.
We don't want to fund anything having to do with bloodshed, hatred, or terror. We're also agreed that Gaza's reconstruction requires that it be demilitarized.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu nominates President Trump to be the first non-Israeli recipient of Israel's highest honor.
As to that other prize, just a question of time, you'll get it. But I want you to get the Israel Prize, our highest award, to our greatest friend.
While the Egyptian president also awards President Trump the country's highest honor, and the Pakistani prime minister renominates him for the Nobel Peace Prize.
I'm deeply honored to receive from you, Egypt's highest state honor, the Order of the Nile.
Today, again, I would like to nominate this great president for Nobel Peace Prize.
President Trump also urges the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, to pardon Netanyahu of his bribery charges from 2019.
This has been one of the greatest wartime presidents, and cigars and champagne, who the hell cares about that?
And on bringing peace to the entire Middle East, President Trump says that the U.S. is ready for a peace deal with Iran when Tehran is.
Yet even to Iran, whose regime has inflicted so much death on the Middle East, the hand of friendship and cooperation is open.
Reporting from the White House, Mario Otsu, NTD News.
Mari, thank you. The Hamas terrorist group has released all 20 living hostages who had been held in captivity for 2 years. And in exchange, Israel released from detention almost 2,000 Palestinians. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
On Monday, members of the Hamas terrorist group cleared the way for a convoy of Red Cross vehicles to make its way through a crowd of residents in the Gaza Strip. The vehicles were traveling toward Israel, carrying hostages whom Hamas had held in captivity for the last 2 years. The Red Cross helped transport 20 living hostages to members of the Israel Defense Forces who were waiting to receive them. Israeli troops were seen speaking with the newly released hostages before they boarded helicopters to be transported to Israeli hospitals. A crowd of people was gathered at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv when a helicopter flew over them. And another crowd welcomed the former hostages outside a hospital, where they would soon meet with their family members after 2 years of not knowing whether they would ever see each other again. Evyatar David, who was recently shown in a Hamas video being forced to dig his own grave, reunited with his childhood friend Guy Gilboa DeLaw. Both of them were kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival 2 years ago, and both were released from captivity on Monday. And in exchange for the hostages, Israel released 250 Palestinian prisoners and 1,700 detainees who were captured during the war in the Gaza Strip. Crowds of people gathered in Ramallah in the West Bank to receive them, while others were released in Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip. According to the Gaza peace plan brokered by President Trump, the Hamas terrorist group is also supposed to release the bodies of the 28 deceased hostages who remain in the territory. And on Monday, Hamas released the bodies of 4 hostages that arrived at an Israeli forensic institute for identification. Looking ahead, the focus will now turn to the remaining steps of the historic peace plan. Jason Perry, NTD News.
A touching report there from Jason Perry. Now, the Israeli military has released excerpts from a handwritten document it says was written by slain Hamas terrorist leader Yahya Sinwar. The document contains detailed plans for the October 7, 2023 terror attack on Israel. Written in 2022, the document calls for graphic acts of violence to spread terror in Israel and incite uprisings among Palestinians.
The instructions also include tactical guidance for breaching Israel's defenses using bulldozers and coordinated multi-point assaults. The IDF says Sinwar was killed last October after spending a year hiding among Gaza's civilian population and moving between safe houses and through underground tunnels. And world leaders, along with figures across the political spectrum here in the U.S., are praising the historic Middle East peace agreement brokered by President Trump. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez brings us the details.
Mr. President, you stand before the people of Israel not as another American president, but as a giant of Jewish history. You, President Donald J. Trump, are a colossus who will be enshrined in the pantheon of history.
President Trump received a standing ovation at the Israeli Knesset, where he also opened the door for future peace negotiations with Iran. European leaders also highlighted how the ceasefire in the Middle East was a Trump administration accomplishment.
I think he has a huge importance in, it's his deal. He put all the pressure on it. And of course, other countries helped, particularly Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt. But I think a lot of countries pushed on pressure, also Netanyahu. But I think Trump deserves all the credit.
Leaders in the Middle East also acknowledge how any lasting peace and the successful implementation of the Phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas will depend on the continuous engagement of the Trump administration in the region.
We have to keep President Trump engaging, and that's very, very important because it's all about his engagement, it's all about his vision, and he's the one who's able to deliver and to end this war and to bring an end to the whole conflict of in the Middle East.
President Trump, who is genuinely a man of peace, who has relentlessly and untiringly worked throughout these months, day in and day out, to make this world a place to live with peace and prosperity.
And in the U.S., former political rivals of President Trump, like Hillary Clinton, and sitting U.S. senators like Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, put national politics aside to acknowledge the historic accomplishment of the Trump administration.
Really commend President Trump and his administration, as well as Arab leaders in the region, for making the commitment to the 20-point plan.
I think he should get a lot of credit. I mean, this was his deal.
Democratic Senator John Fetterman posted on social media that peace should be bipartisan, celebrated, and built upon. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Important updates there from Luis. Adding to that, former President Biden has praised President Trump for his role in brokering a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas.
In a statement on X yesterday, Biden commended Trump and his team for their work to get a ceasefire deal over the finish line.
Biden also highlighted his administration's efforts to bring hostages home and provide aid to Palestinian civilians. He said the Israeli hostages went through unimaginable hell and said civilians in Gaza will finally get a chance to rebuild their lives.
Biden also said with U.S. backing, the Middle East is on a path to peace. He expressed hope for a future for Israelis and Palestinians alike with equal measures of peace, dignity, and safety.
Still to come, will the first round of missed paychecks pressure lawmakers to reopen the government here in the U.S.? Senators return to Washington as the shutdown enters the 14th day.
And parts of the country from New York all the way up to Alaska are reeling from severe weather. Rescues and cleanups continue with several people killed. We're going to have those details right after this short break.
Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. Senators are returning to Capitol Hill today with no deal in sight to reopen the government. This week marks the first missed paychecks for some million federal employees who are furloughed or working without pay. NTD's Melina Weiskup joins us now with updates. Melina, good to have you with us this morning. Lawmakers and the president were eager to ensure troops were paid. Is that going to happen?
Yeah, so it looks like it will, Steph. The Treasury Secretary said yesterday they're adjusting payment processes to ensure active duty service members can continue to be paid during the shutdown. That's in line with Trump's order that he signed just last week. Now, Steph, this does take the pressure off a little bit as federal workers start missing paychecks, like you mentioned, this week. And for some, those paychecks will be gone permanently, and the pressure will continue to build on lawmakers because of that. Among the areas that will see permanent firings is at NASA, its Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Its director said on Monday that it will cut nearly 550 jobs from this lab. Specifically, one of the areas that will cause pressure from the general public, though, is at airports. Delays are happening nationwide due to a lack of air traffic controllers. Steph, how long this will last is still anyone's guess. The House Speaker just yesterday said he could see it marking the longest shutdown in history. Watch this.
We're barreling toward one of the longest shutdowns in American history unless Democrats drop their partisan demands and pass a clean, no-strings-attached budget to reopen the government and pay our federal workers.
Now, the state of play here, Steph, is that nothing has changed so far on either side of the aisle. Democrats remain insistent that Republicans must negotiate on health care policy, mainly extending Obamacare subsidies and undoing Republicans' changes to Medicaid before they'll hand over the votes needed in the Senate to end the shutdown and pass the Republican short-term funding bill. Senators are back for votes today after a long weekend. With no deal in sight, though, we're still at this point where we're expecting to see a repeat of failed votes on both the Democrat and Republican funding proposals, Steph.
Well, as President Trump turns his focus from the international stage, perhaps back more on the domestic stage today after yesterday's successes, we might see more from the deal maker chief. So let's see how this all turns out. Thank you so much, Congressional Correspondent Melina Weiskup. Communities along the East Coast are cleaning up after a powerful nor'easter battered the region for 3 days, killing at least one person and flooding coastal towns.
Meanwhile, Alaska is reeling from a deadly storm system and floodwaters are sweeping through some Arizona communities. Here are all those details.
In New York City, a state of emergency was in effect Monday as heavy winds and flooding turned streets into rivers. Authorities say a 76-year-old woman was killed in Brooklyn when a solar panel broke loose in the storm, hitting her on the head. Along the Jersey Shore, emergency crews rescued stranded drivers as floodwaters overtook roads. Water levels Monday afternoon were forecast to reach the two most severe flooding stages. The National Weather Service warned of widespread roadway flooding and closures. In Delaware, powerful waves chewed away at dunes and sent water surging into coastal neighborhoods. Voluntary evacuation orders were issued for parts of Bowers Beach as residents watched the shoreline vanish.
You're looking at what the storm took away yesterday afternoon and yesterday evening. All these tree roots were under sand and dirt at the time before the storm.
Thousands of flights were delayed or canceled at airports across the Northeast. Meanwhile, heavy rain and fierce winds have battered Arizona, flooding streets and leaving residential areas looking like rivers. In Tempe, officials say a powerful thunderstorm moved through neighborhoods yesterday, severely damaging several apartment buildings and displacing at least 130 people. Rescuers say one man died after his truck was swept away by floodwaters. The storm left tens of thousands without power and forced temporary closures at sites like the Phoenix Zoo.
Just devastating. Now, while the East Coast faces floodwaters and heavy surf, communities thousands of miles away in western Alaska are also in crisis.
That's right. The remnants of Typhoon Halong have left behind what officials are calling absolute devastation.
The storm swept homes off their foundations and left at least one person dead and 2 missing.
Alaska State Troopers say they rescued more than 50 people in 2 coastal villages on Monday.
Some locals say the storm was worst that they'd ever seen. Alaska senators say they'll push for more disaster recovery and climate resilience funding.
And tensions are escalating in Chicago over ICE operations and a potential National Guard deployment against the wishes of the mayor and governor in what the Trump administration is calling Operation Midway Blitz. Joining us now to discuss is former immigration judge Andrew Arthur, who is a fellow in law at policy at the Center for Immigration Studies. Thanks for joining us this morning, Andrew. Welcome. The Trump administration and the local Chicago and Illinois leadership have been very much at odds. The National Guard is stationed right outside of Chicago, though currently blocked by a federal judge from deploying and doing anything on the ground. So what is the Trump administration's next move to potentially get those National Guard deployed and onto the streets?
So, yeah, that case is currently, we just received a decision from the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. So the next move for the Trump administration would be to ask the Supreme Court to lift the stay on the deployment of the Texas National Guard troops who are in Chicago but can't be deployed, or in Illinois but can't be deployed to the streets of Chicago and can't be deployed to the Broadview facility that ICE is running that's been the scene of all those protests, which is why you see Illinois state troopers holding back the crowds, because Illinois' argument is we've got state troopers, we've got cops, they can provide enough security, we don't need the National Guard. So even though J.B. Pritzker isn't in favor of immigration enforcement, the governor of Illinois has got no choice but to send his troopers out.
Now, do you expect the National Guard to go in? And if so, what would be their specific role? Is it limited just to that ICE facility, or does it look more like what happened in D.C.?
So the president envisions it being something like happened in D.C. And by the way, for your viewers, I was in D.C. about 2 weeks ago, and, I'd see, crews of 4 National Guardsmen sort of languidly walking around. So it was more of an indication of order than a show of force. But and the president envisions the same thing in Chicago to sort of tamp down on the crime and, any lawlessness that they have there. But they would also be deployed to that Broadview Center to provide security, to do what the troopers that you just showed in the clip are doing. So, that it's sort of a dual mission, but right now it's all held up in the courts.
Yeah, and I do want to come back to what that could look like on the crime front, not necessarily in the immigration front. But before that, from a legal perspective, where does the Trump administration stand? What legal definition must be met for them to be able to deploy the National Guard?
So in order to deploy the National Guard, the president either needs to declare a rebellion or an insurrection, or contend that the troops are needed to protect federal enforcement activities, pure federal activities, which is why, Dwight Eisenhower sent troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, because they were the state officials were preventing people from attending desegregated schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. So the last part isn't a very high standard, certainly with respect to the Broadview facility. Again, there's a reason that we see a show of force by state troopers at that facility. With respect to Chicago itself, he's probably on a slightly slimmer read because it's going to be very difficult to assert that there's a rebellion or an insurrection there. There's crime. I mean, there's plainly crime. But, those other aspects not really met. Now, if there were any attacks on federal courthouses or other federal buildings in Chicago, they could certainly be deployed there.
Now, turning our attention to the immigration aspect of this, there have been over 1,000 arrests so far in Operation Midway Blitz. While there have been reports of Tren de Aragua members being targeted, there have also been reports of nonviolent illegal immigrants being arrested. What are you observing?
So, yeah, and it's interesting, Kerry, that you make that point, because one of the things that we heard when Kilmar Abrego Garcia was inadvertently, wrongly sent to El Salvador was a cry that, what we really want is due process. He's been denied his due process rights. The people that are being arrested, the non-criminals being arrested in Chicago, and I have no idea how many of those there are individuals who are either under final orders of removal or people who are removable from the United States. And of course, people who are under a final order of removal have received due process. People who are removable from the United States would be taken into custody so they could receive due process. So, this, criminal, non-criminal dichotomy is one of those things that's fairly novel, been promoted or what started being promoted at the end of the Obama administration. But in my 33 years of immigration enforcement and being around immigration enforcement, we never really focused on that. The question was whether people are removable or not. But yeah, there have been a number of, high-profile individuals, drug traffickers and alleged Tren de Aragua members who have been arrested in Chicago. So that's, clearly happening. What this really comes down to, Kerry, is that Chicago and Illinois are both sanctuary jurisdictions. They don't allow ICE into their local jails. They don't honor ICE detainers to turn over criminals who have been convicted. If they would just do that, ICE would probably be too busy handling criminals to actually go out on the street and do the sorts of operations that people are complaining about. So all of this is really political theater. You could say that it's political theater on the Trump administration's part, certainly, but don't miss the fact that it's also political theater on the part of Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago and Governor Pritzker of Illinois.
Got it. So both sides are holding more of a political or theatrical line, but ultimately what would be the most efficient from both perspectives is cooperation so that the emphasis could be put on the worst of the worst. But because there's no cooperation, they have to sort of do a larger dragnet, and other people who are here illegally, so technically in violation of the law, but maybe not the target of ICE, get swept in the current. Am I understanding that?
Yeah, no, Kerry. I mean, that is the perfect summation of what's going on here. And, you hear a lot of high-profile Democrats, including Senator Alex Padilla of California, who say, if we were only talking about criminal aliens, there'd be no disagreement, no debate. But, in California, they have something called SB 54 that almost completely prevents California authorities from participating with ICE or assisting ICE in any way in finding those criminal aliens. This is a 78% approval issue in the latest Harvard-Harris polling. And yet, most major outlets don't really address the fact that there is this concentrated effort by states and localities across the United States to impede ICE's ability to get those criminals off the street.
And as you point out, some very violent ones were picked up in this larger effort. So if they could work together, there could be a better outcome for both sides. But the political football needs to be maintained, I presume. Now, just as we finish up, Andrew, I do want to get the focus on just the crime element of Chicago. Every weekend for decades, potentially, there's always been murders in Chicago, something that was also present in D.C. It would seem like everybody would want that to stop, and not needing to declare what the threshold of emergency might be to try to get a reboot. Is that likely to happen, do you see, over the next few months?
I think and that's a great question, Kerry. I think that this is going to be one of those things where the electorate, the voters, in this country, the people hold the power. And yet many elected officials view all criminal enforcement, or most criminal enforcement, as being, in some way, illegitimate. We certainly saw that in the wake of the death of George Floyd and various other things. And I think that, that is still a prevalent theme in this system. On the one hand, you have a vast majority of Americans who want to see criminals taken off the street. At the same time, you have a very vocal minority, many of whom are in elected office, who sort of push back against that. They want cashless bail. They want, repeat offenders to have, a second, a third, a 17th, a 20th chance. And so, this is one of those, this is a moment in history when we're still working that out as a people. And I think that at the end of the day, we're going to return to a law and order posture. But for right now, don't miss the fact that there are people, who don't like enforcement, don't like incarceration, want people to, maybe pay a fine, but then, go back out on the street with the promise that they'll do better. That never happens. And I think that we're probably going to, sooner or later return to that posture. We're just not there yet.
Well, appreciate all your insights this morning. Good to see you, Andrew. Arthur, thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen.
President Trump will posthumously award the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk today at the White House. The ceremony is scheduled for 4 p.m. Kirk's wife, Erica, will accept the nation's highest civilian honor on his behalf. Kirk was assassinated last month during an event at Utah Valley University. President Trump credited the father of two with helping energize young voters and playing a key role in his 2024 campaign victory. The president called Kirk a champion of liberty and a giant of his generation. The medal ceremony coincides with what would have been Kirk's 32nd birthday. And authorities in Tennessee have released the names of all 16 victims of last week's deadly explosion at a rural explosives plant there.
Officials read aloud the names during a somber news conference on Monday, describing a close-knit community still reeling from the loss.
May not have known that individual personally, but in some form or fashion we probably or do know their family or extended family, and it's this small county rural America where everybody knows each other and everybody's going to take care of each other.
The Accurate Energetic Systems plant supplied explosives for the U.S. military and employed many local residents. Authorities say the explosion left no survivors and was powerful enough to be felt more than 20 miles away.
Investigators say the blast left a massive debris field stretching for miles, and they're now facing a painstaking effort to piece together what caused the deadly blast.
We'll keep you updated on any further developments in that tragedy. Next, the FBI has arrested 4 people in connection with a shooting in Leland, Mississippi.
The shooting this weekend left 6 dead and more than a dozen injured.
Officials say Tevian Powell, William Bryant, and Morgan Lattimore face capital murder charges, while LaToya Powell is charged with attempted murder.
The shooting erupted during homecoming celebrations in downtown Leland after a local high school football game.
The FBI says the gunfire appeared to have been sparked by a disagreement among several individuals and is still under consideration.
The Leland shooting was one of several incidents across Mississippi over the weekend, including deadly gunfire at 2 other homecoming events.
Next, California is implementing new laws targeting AI chatbots and promoting online safety. The state says they want to encourage innovation while also protecting children and teens. NTD's David Lamb reports.
California moved forward with the first-of-its-kind law regulating artificial intelligence chatbots. On Monday, Governor Gavin Newsom signed the bill. The chatbot law comes after reports of suicides involving teens who used chatbots prior to ending their lives. Brian Downing, an assistant professor of law, talks about the legality of chatbot interactions.
The interesting sort of collapse that has occurred recently is that chatbots are much more like speakers. And so there has been a kind of hashing out in the courts right now, especially in cases involving user suicides where the harm is great and there was communication directly with the user via this chatbot platform.
Governor Newsom said, emerging technology like chatbots and social media can inspire, educate, and connect. But without real guardrails, technology can also exploit, mislead, and endanger our kids. Under the new law, minors must be given break reminders and be prevented from viewing sexually explicit images generated by chatbots. age verification will also be required to prevent kids from accessing inappropriate or dangerous content online. Additional safeguards include warning labels reminding kids about the dangers of extended use of social media. There will also be stronger penalties for people who profit from illegal deepfake content. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Just joining us now, here's some of today's top headlines. President Trump this week meeting with Ukrainian President Zelenskyy in Washington. Talks on Friday will be focused on air defense. Kyiv has been pressing for Tomahawk missiles, and Trump says he may speak with Russian President Putin before making a final decision. The president also confirmed plans to meet with China's Xi Jinping at the APEC summit later this month. President Trump, of course, signed a historic ceasefire agreement yesterday at the Gaza Peace Summit in Egypt. He said phase 2 of the peace plan has already begun. The 20 remaining living Israeli hostages were released by Hamas yesterday in exchange for nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. Hamas also released the bodies of 4 out of the 28 deceased hostages, which have been transported for identification. World leaders and U.S. lawmakers praised the peace plan, with former President Biden commending Trump and his team for their work to get the deal over the finish line. And senators returning to Capitol Hill today with no deal in sight to reopen the government as the shutdown enters the 14th day. The Treasury said they are adjusting payment processes to ensure that active duty service members can continue to be paid during the shutdown. House Speaker Mike Johnson said yesterday this could mark the longest shutdown in history. Democrats remain insistent that Republicans must negotiate on health care policy before they'll hand over the votes needed to end the shutdown. And a powerful nor'easter has battered the East Coast now for 3 days, killing at least one and flooding coastal towns from New York to Delaware. Up in Alaska, the remnants of Typhoon Halong have left a trail of devastation. It swept up homes, killing at least one person. And down in Arizona, storms have turned streets into rivers, leaving 1 dead and 10,000 without power. Those are this morning's top headlines. With that, Steph, over to you.
Thanks, Carrie. Next, a planned meeting with President Trump and Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping is expected at the end of this month at the APEC summit in South Korea. Ahead of this, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is calling the CCP's structure brittle. Rivalries for power in China call into question who's really in charge. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Monday says that a lower-level Chinese Communist Party official may have been responsible for the new export restrictions on Chinese rare earth minerals, all in an effort to undermine the Chinese leader Xi Jinping's power.
I believe that the president thinks that this may have been, from a lower level official. The Chinese system is quite brittle, so this may not have come from Xi Jinping himself. This may have come, from a Chinese hardliner. They have hardliners on their side too, who are always trying to undermine the relationship.
Before the APEC summit happens at the end of the month, there will be a large CCP Central Committee meeting happening next week, and they'll discuss their 5-year plan for the poor state of China's economy, among other issues. But it's at these meetings where we may see a power play. In 2022, former CCP leader Hu Jintao was removed from a Central Committee meeting when Xi Jinping took power. This comes as the CCP has arrested dozens of pastors and churchgoers at the unregistered Zion Church over the weekend. The Zion Church is a Christian organization, and it says across 5 provinces in China, over 30 of its church leaders and members were detained or disappeared. Worship venues were raided, and family members of the church were harassed. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Sunday condemning the CCP for targeting the church, saying in a statement, quote, "This further demonstrates how the CCP exercises hostility towards Christians who reject party interference in their faith and choose to worship at unregistered house churches." In order for a church to become official in China, the CCP requires them to submit to party doctrine, meaning that the party requires them to abide by party doctrine first and Holy Scripture second. The CCP has waged war against faith groups for a century, with party leaders launching campaigns of suppression to control religious communities in China, as it takes anything spiritual to be a direct threat to its absolute power. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Jack, thank you so much. And staying with China news, Taiwanese prosecutors have exposed a Chinese espionage plot involving an officer posing as a journalist.
Yeah, this one is pretty wild. A Chinese intelligence officer posing as a reporter for our sister media, the Epoch Times, allegedly tried to recruit Taiwanese military personnel and gather defense intelligence.
The bureau chief said the alleged spy leveraged widespread trust built up by the Epoch Times in Taiwan. The woman has been identified as a member of China's armed police in Shanxi province. Prosecutors say she used fake names and claimed to work for the Hong Kong bureau of the newspaper.
Authorities say she met a former Taiwanese naval officer through a dating app in 2023, who later introduced her to a missile brigade officer. Both men are accused of sharing non-public military information in exchange for cash payments. The Epoch Times condemned the impersonation, calling it part of Beijing's wider campaign to discredit and infiltrate the publication.
And we condemn it too. Chinese fast fashion brand Shein is opening a large retail space inside a famous department store in Paris. The move has drawn criticism from across the fashion industry and from government agencies.
It also highlights the brand's push to expand exports to Europe amid rising tensions over U.S. tariffs. NTD's international correspondent David Vives reports from Paris.
Paris fashion store BHV is preparing to open a 1,000 square meter space for Chinese brand Shein. This is one of the 6 first physical stores of Shein in the country. But critics warn this could act as a Trojan horse, flooding the French market with low-quality, ultra-fast fashion products. Yann Rivaud-Allan, president of the French Federation of Prêt-à-Porter, representing hundreds of French brands, says the BHV has crossed a red line.
Évidemment, la mode française est claire et très forte.
French fashion is a global symbol, illuminating the world with its creations day after day, month after month, year after year. But it's more than that. France is the largest market for Chinese fashion in Europe. Through France, China sells to millions and generates nearly $3 billion in sales. France is a gateway for China to the world, and we must stop this disposable fashion in France to protect Europe and beyond.
The arrival of Shein has sparked strong reactions in France. Galeries Lafayette, another major department store, refused to host Shein, citing a profound disagreement over the brand's positioning and practices. The French government agency responsible for negotiating subsidies with large retailers announced it would halt funding for projects involving BHV. Rivaud-Allan says Shein harms the textile industry in many ways, mainly by producing thousands of counterfeit products every day. Many of these copies, made of up to 85% polyester, are difficult to track and remove from the market.
Comme Shein, tous les jours fabrique 10 000 nouveaux produits.
Shein creates 10,000 new products every day. Examining 10,000 new products daily to identify counterfeits is time-consuming and extremely costly. To pursue a counterfeit claim, we need to know sales volumes in China, which is very difficult to obtain. China exploits this complexity by constantly copying and changing styles, making it nearly impossible for French companies to take effective action.
Official figures show a 20% surge in Chinese textile and clothing exports to Europe over the first half of 2025, a trend linked to President Trump's 30% tariffs on Chinese goods. New threats of tariffs of up to 100% from the U.S. administration could accelerate this trend. Rivaud-Allan urges France and Europe to adopt similar measures to protect the textile industry.
Trump a mis en place une taxation de $100.
Trump has imposed huge tariffs on all Chinese products. This has largely halted their growth in the United States and, unfortunately for Europe, has redirected much of the production toward European markets. Europe must therefore match the United States in defending its industries and asserting itself.
Shein's new stores are set to open in France on November 1st. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
David Vives with another great report.
That's right.
Still to come, consumers taking to artificial intelligence in search of better deals. How the trend is impacting one industry, what an expert says you need to know. Coming straight up. Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. A new trend is disrupting the dynamics in consumer decisions, and it could change the way you treat your finances, big and small. We're talking about AI and legal contracts. Joining us to discuss is Paul Fix, an automotive journalist with Car Coach Reports. And we're looking directly at the auto industry right now with this trend. What are consumers doing differently, Paul, when it comes to car buying?
Well, car buying has never really been a simple process, at least as long as I have been alive. There's always very complicated contracts and stacking deals that you can take advantage of. Sometimes there's deals from the government, like we've talked about the electric vehicle tax credit before. And some of these things can be very difficult for consumers to navigate all on their own when the contracts are many, many pages long, full of legalese, and all there's that little fine print that people don't really know what it always means there. So it seems like there's a growing trend here. It's actually a quarter of all buyers, according to a study, that say that they're using artificial intelligence like ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini to help them with their buying decisions. And they're doing that right in the dealership with the salesperson at the table, which apparently a lot of salespeople are not really happy about.
Yeah, certainly throws a spanner in the works in some sense. How are they responding? You know, dealerships, how are they reacting to this? There must be some shift on their part to accommodate this.
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of a pushback because at the end of the day, the dealerships feel like they are the experts on being able to sell the car. And when a consumer comes in and they are the expert, they know more than what the dealership knows. Obviously, it doesn't feel so great for them. There was even a quote that I saw that when the customer knows more than the finance manager, you know that there's a little bit of a problem going on. But look, there's a lot of things to be covered all in these contracts. And sometimes there's even add-ons that people don't even want: extended warranties, gap insurance, inflated dock fees, and many more. I mean, you can go and look at buying a car and think that it's within your budget, and all of a sudden it's thousands of dollars more than you expect. And if you know how to negotiate properly and you know what to look for, then you can take a lot of those things out of the contract that maybe you don't feel are necessary for your car buying decisions. But when you use an assistant like AI that's able to scan all these things for you, if you don't have the knowledge yourself, then you are essentially empowering yourself to be able to negotiate properly without that additional knowledge. You don't have to go and do your own research. The research is already there. It's on the internet.
So from the consumer's perspective, and then also just from the industry perspective, are there any drawbacks here to this trend?
Well, there's definitely hallucinations from AI. I've been experimenting a lot with AI, specifically within the automotive world. And there's so much esoteric knowledge. There's so many little tiny tidbits of things that, me being in the automotive industry my entire life, I know a lot of these little tiny bits of knowledge that I'm able to share with people and hopefully help their buying decisions and who they go to for a mechanic and how they understand how pieces of a car work or how pieces of a process work. Not everybody knows that information, and AI sometimes gets that stuff wrong as well because there's information on the internet that might not be correct, or there may be a myth that's traveled through the internet that's just stayed on there and never been corrected, and AI doesn't always know the difference. But here's the biggest thing I thought was interesting, because I've been doing a lot of research into AI itself. When it hallucinates, sometimes it's just trying to give you an answer. It's not trying to give you the right answer. And it even admitted that to me one time when I asked it for information on classic Mustangs, and it gave me an answer. I said, well, I know that that's not right. At least I can verify that that's not correct because I have the knowledge and I have people that I know who have the knowledge that know that this information is not correct. And I asked it why, and it said, oh, because you wanted an answer. And if you're sitting and looking at a contract, trying to buy a $30,000+ car, you should really make sure that the information that you're bringing to the table is correct.
Certainly so. And it does seem like this trend could lead to some kind of pricing war that's AI powered between the seller and the buyer right at the negotiating table. Right. But what I guess it seems like it's pointing to is consumers responding to potentially a lack of good communication or a lack of trust with dealerships, and just wanting your perspective on how dealerships might build trust with buyers again in this age of AI.
Yeah, this has been a big problem for many, many, many years. I mean, there's the jokes about the sleazy salesman trying to sell you a broken car and all sorts like that. Um, I think that there's a breakdown in communication that's been present for decades, and I'm not really sure how to repair it except for more straightforward pricing and and straightforward communication about what exactly people are getting when they're signing up for these programs, why there's an additional doc fee, what exactly gap insurance is. Instead of just, oh, don't worry, it's all in there, just sign it. There needs to be that open line of communication and a proper description for the customer, because you never want to just buy something and not know what you're getting. Again, especially because you're spending $30,000, $40,000, $100,000 on a car. You really need to know what you're getting. Just like buying a house, you don't want to be blinded by something.
Whether that's AI or a human or both, people just want the truth, right? So perhaps this age of AI and age of technology may lead to a more human solution. We'll have to wait and see.
Maybe.
Thank you so much, Paul Fix. Good to speak with you. All right, we are heading now to our next hour. Please join us at the top of the hour. Welcome back to NTD. Good morning. Elon Musk's SpaceX marks another major milestone in its path to deep space exploration.
The company successfully launched its 11th Starship flight yesterday.
Crowds cheered at Starbase, Texas, as the Starship and its super heavy booster cleared the pad. It successfully touched down in the Indian Ocean 1 hour and 6 minutes later. The spacecraft exploded very shortly after splashdown, but SpaceX had said it was not intending to recover the vehicle, nor did SpaceX say that the explosion made the test a failure.
This flight closes the chapter on the second-generation Starship, paving now the way for the powerful V3 upgrade. Now, that rocket is expected to have a significantly better engine, heat shields, and in-flight capabilities. NASA has praised the progress, calling it another major step toward landing Americans on the moon's south pole.
And on the Starship website, I mean, they're aiming for the moon, to orbit Earth, and also Mars and beyond. And I've got to say, they are actually at the forefront of many technological developments. I was reading an article in the Epoch Times by Newt Gingrich over the weekend, and he was talking about the he thinks that there is actually a revolution in warfare coming, and one of the markers of that is SpaceX's lowering the price of satellite launches by 90%. Wow. But also, this SpaceX Starship is the first to be fully reusable, and they're actually they're aiming to produce the ability to have rapid travel around the Earth in under an hour.
Yeah, I think he said something like, being able to go transatlantic in what would normally take someone their normal commute to work in a big city. So yeah, these are very interesting times. Tech is transforming really every aspect of our life. And of course, warfare, you would expect a lot of the developments and breakthroughs come on that front for sure.
Okay, next, a California engineer and gardening enthusiast won the top prize at an annual pumpkin weighing contest in Northern California yesterday.
Yeah, Brandon Dawson, he clinched the victory at the 52nd World Championship Pumpkin Weigh-Off with a pumpkin. This one weighed more than 2,300 pounds.
Oh my.
I'm not a professional farmer. I work at Rivian as an engineer in manufacturing engineering. So I work on electric vehicles as my day job and grow pumpkins as a hobby. I was in this position last year, but I lost by 6 pounds. This year was able to take the win, and that's really what the goal was this year, was to win one of the best, if not the best, pumpkin weigh-offs in the world.
The massive pumpkin comes in at a similar weight to a small sedan or a large bison. Dawson says he's been growing giant pumpkins for 5 years.
He says precision skills that are acquired at his job helped him with the right watering, the sunlight, for this pumpkin to grow and be a champion. The pumpkin also claimed the $20,000 prize for growing his champion gourd.
I need to get this guy's help with my seedling rosemary garden that I'm starting on my on my windowsill. I think his advice could help.
Yeah, you know, people who go into engineering, they can apply that to all sorts of things.
Right.
So he's building, you know, very fantastic EV SUVs. You know, the Rivian, that's quite a luxury vehicle, but you know, those skills also help with gardening. So.
Right, certainly so.
A background in it. Do your math, kids. You never know where it's going to serve you in life.
That's so true. My dad has a similar kind of position, but he loves baking bread. And the way that he approaches bread baking is so scientific, but it leads to these very delicious results, I've got to say.
Bakers are scientists and cooks are artists, right?
That's it. Especially when it comes to baking, I think. All right, well, we've got to wrap up our show now, but be sure to stay tuned for NTD News Today at 10 a.m. Eastern Time coming up.
Around-the-clock original news coverage. You can always visit us at ntd.com. Hopefully by now you're using our NTD app. Thanks for watching. I'm Carrie Dunst.
And I'm Stephanie Cox. See you soon.